Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens, and this is Carly Stevens Books for all things writing, publishing, and indie author life. And I am delighted to be able to speak to George Morris Diath today. So thank you so much for coming on the channel.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, so a little bit about George. He is a British author who writes thriller and horror books that explore the darker aspects of the human psyche. He is a London West End playwright, actor, and model, as well as a gin drinker. He lives in London where he allows his creative flair to shine. The Haunting of Morsley Manor, which is what we'll be talking about primarily in this interview, is his third book. So, to kick things off, can you tell me a little bit about how you got into writing in the first place? It seems like you have a lot of uh, different passions, different things that you're doing. How did writing come into the mix?
Well, it's funny because ever since I was a kid, um, I was writing short stories, and I wasn't very good at anything else really, basically, but I excelled at that. I excelled at that. And I remember doing my first ever short story at the age of 7 that was about a little boy kicking a ball down a drain. And then he basically like meets this creature, but then the creature turns out to be, a friend, and there's a whole thing to it. I plan to come back to it at a later date. But the teacher was like, "What? You're 7 years old. Why are you writing that?" It was a little bit concerning, but it showed promise, let's say. So then years and years later, I don't really think about writing, nothing like that. I've always done quite well in like creative writing exams and things here in the UK. And then I'd had to do a competition when I was 15, and that got published. And again, didn't really think much of it. And then when I was 18, I couldn't sleep. I've never been a very good sleeper. I know now a lot of us doom scroll to fill the time and stuff. But back then, I had nothing to do. So I started writing, and that was what became, I mean, in that time, I started writing basically my debut novel, Face of Evil.
Hmm.
And then again, I didn't really know what to do with it. I kind of put it out on submission for a few years, and then 5 years later, just kind of doing it again and again and again. Over lockdown, it got a deal, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess this is working then. This is something I can do and excel in. But yeah, I really enjoyed, I think with writing, I just like living in that little bubble, where the world can't like interrupt you and you can just sit there and create a little world with all these characters. And it's just immersive. It is very immersive. And I mean, as a writer yourself, I'm sure like, like it's so great just to be enveloped in a story and just be taken away by it because there's that whole argument, isn't there, of are you a planner or are you a planter? Do you plan everything out like exactly, or do you plant things and then see how they go? I mean, I'm a bit more, I stick in the middle. I keep quite a rigid plan, but then as I'm writing, I like to, jazz it up a bit and like see where it takes me. Um, but yeah, I've lost my train of thought talking about that, but it's always like an interesting thing in doing that. And yeah, I find writing so fascinating, and it's filled up a lot of my time. It fills up a lot of my time now. So yeah, that's how it kind of started. And I've always had like a very natural draw to darker stories, clearly, as that little 7-year old who the teachers were very, very concerned about. But yeah, hasn't failed me yet. So fingers crossed, touch wood, touch wood.
Right. It seems to be working for you. I actually have not heard that term planter before. Typically, the divide, as I hear it described in the way that I describe it, is you're a plotter or a pantser slash discovery writer,
Yeah.
whichever term you prefer. But I like planter because I also fall somewhere in the middle between those two extremes. And so I like that quite
Do
a
you do the
bit.
same sort of thing then where you make that outline like quite rigidly and then you see where you can go with it as you're writing? Or do you keep it quite loosey-goosey with like an end goal in mind?
I would say I'm more loosey-goosey, but it depends on the project. Like I have rigidly planned out every single scene, and then I've just begun something and had no clue where it was going, and then we just all find out together. But usually I fall into like I'll have tent posts, and like I know that this will be something. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but this will be a turning point, and then this is kind of where it's going to end, and then I just like find my way. But I also agree with what you were saying about creating that immersive environment. It certainly is more, I think it's healthier than doom scrolling in the middle of the night, is creating this place that you can be in, because not only are you offering this experience to other people, but you're giving yourself the ability to go through all these adventures, know these people as well. So that kind of leads me to my next question. Can you tell us a little bit more specifically about your upcoming novel, The Haunting of Morsley Manor, and what sets it apart from other haunted house stories? Because there are so many out there. I mean, I like the occasional haunted house story, but what makes yours unique?
I've got my review copy here. I don't know if that's going to be the first one. There we go. A little plug for you guys, visual plug. Um, I think, yeah, horror has been such a staple just like throughout the entire publishing industry. I mean, clearly, but I think we're at such an interesting state at the moment because there's so many different flavors of horror, and you can really pick and choose what kind of horror story you want. This particular horror story is quite, I mean, reviews are coming out at the moment and saying it is quite campy, it's quite dark. If you like things like American Horror Story, like Chucky, those kind of things, I think this is a book you'll quite enjoy. I think if you go into this wanting very, very like serious, like throughout serious drama with your horror, then no, maybe not. But I think with this book in particular, what's good about it is it's quite playful in a sense because I said to myself I was going to write one proper ghost horror story in my lifetime. So I wanted to really convey all the different tropes we've seen throughout all the different decades and centuries. So you've got ghosts, you've got your clowns, you've got a creepy doll, you've got witches that I plan to come back to for their own trilogy. They're quite fun. They're fun. We love a witch. Um, but I wanted to sprinkle them all in, but then also bring in a lot of like modern, things to play with that sort of subvert expectations in that sense. I can't say too much because it will give away some twists, but there's a sprinkling of old homages. Can never say that word. Homages. And new age elements that I think keep it somewhat fresh and keep the pace going from beginning to end. But it's a wild ride. It's a wild ride of a book, is what I would say.
It sounds like you have quite the interesting subgenre salad going on with your work. So what is the basic idea of it? You've mentioned a bunch of ingredients and elements and kind of who it's for, but if you just had to give an elevator pitch, what is the setup of the story?
So, basically, Eric Thompson's a very famous paranormal investigator. His career has taken a bit of a slump the last few years because of certain incidents with his past. And basically now he's trying to get himself back out there. And he has presented this case at Morsley Manor, which is one of the most haunted places on the earth. And so he goes there, but something's not quite right about the case. And it's not just necessarily the fact that it's haunted. There's something else weird going on. It just doesn't quite match up to his senses. Um, and so yeah, that's basically it. And you have to find out the rest for yourself.
I love it. We love a paranormal investigator.
Yeah.
That just makes me all excited to read that kind of
Well,
book.
yeah, and I mean another thing, I always bury the lead on this, but another interesting thing with him being a paranormal investigator is that he himself is a little bit witchy and he's got certain abilities so that if he
Hmm.
touches something that was like, say, an instrument that killed someone at Morsley Manor, he can then see the flashback of what happened, and he can sometimes then see the ghosts and whatnot. So he's very attuned to that world, basically. And he gets these senses and, is a bit of a magnet for all of these spirits running riot at Morsley. So,
So he is himself paranormal to a certain extent as well as
yeah.
he's trying to investigate these occurrences. I love
And
it.
he's getting a lot of these. I can't give away too much, but I'll give away enough. He's getting these dreams that he's always had, but they're now starting to develop because it's usually been the same sort of dream. They're starting to develop, and he's feeling as though there's a bit of a calling to Morsley, and he might be getting a message delivered to him at this place. Dot dot dot.
we'll just we'll just keep that
Yeah.
as a hint for future things to come,
Mm.
assuming that you check out this book afterwards. Early plug, but I'll have all the links below if you want to check all that out. So you've already hinted at it, but in your story, you have a lot of horror subgenres. As I was initially looking at the description, it's described as gory, supernatural, campy horror, and then reviews are calling it atmospheric and gothic and a thriller. I mean, that's a lot of
It's a
things in
lot.
here. Did you consider, like, or maybe I should ask, how did you think about subgenre in this book? Or was there a different way that you decided which elements to include? Was it just personal taste, or were you considering kind of how to position the book because this was your third? Just basically talk subgenre, if you would.
Um, yeah, so it's a funny thing. Like I was saying, coming up with the idea for this book, I knew I was going to do like one haunted house, and I wanted this haunted house to have a bit of everything to it, and it gives the history of the house a very long running history um throughout the time it's been there on that very blood-soaked land. Um, so with that, you've got all these different, like you say, subgenres because you're kind of like paying the homages to things like, I don't know, the Annabelle doll. There's all these different things. Pennywise, I guess. There's a bit of The Shining in there. All these great classic horror stories that we all know and love. But I didn't get too bogged down with it and how it meshed all together. I just kind of stuck them all in this blender and just kind of hoped for the best, I guess. I mean, I guess that's all you could ever do. But yeah, I really enjoyed just playing with all those different subgenres because also another two that I love that are the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. I mean, it's such a cliche to say now, but it's, comedy and horror. They're so great to put together because 1 second you're sitting there like, oh, like what's going to happen? The next second you're just like crying with laughter. And they just go so well. And it becomes somewhat addictive because it's that, tumultuous up and down behavior about the nature of a book that makes you so gripped and wanting to read more because you don't know what's going to happen next. I hope I've brought that to the book a little bit. Um, wait and see. Um, but yeah, I think that it's a bit of a Frankenstein-esque, subgenre that, we'll have to give some lightning to when it finally does open itself up to the public and just see what everyone thinks of it. But yeah, I don't get too it's a funny thing because again, it's that thing of how much are you planning, not necessarily with the story, but then how much are you planning marketing and commercial wise, I guess. Like do are you writing this because you want to tell a good story or because you want to make it sell, or is it a bit of both and stuff? And I personally, I mean, maybe you'll like be very different to me, but like if I have a good story in my head, I'll just kind of write it and just kind of see what comes out of it. I mean, I know as well some authors come like they think about theme a lot when they're first thinking up like what the book is even going to be. They think I'm going to write this book and the theme's going to be about grief or something. I For me, I can get a bit too bogged down with that stuff. So I like to write it and then afterwards I'll read it and go, oh, I guess the theme was about grief. Or something. Oh, I guess my subconscious was doing its thing there. Which I
Then
think
that
is
would help
how,
with editing, like after the fact, once you figured out what to
yeah.
sort of play up early on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as well when you're talking about the book afterwards, because as well, like I wrote this book about 7, 8 years ago. So it's so funny to look back on something and especially when I was editing with my publishers and just be like, wow, okay, George was going through stuff. Like he was he had some interesting stuff on his mind. Like that's wow. But yeah, I think things like like the subgenre and stuff you can I mean anything that's like evaluating the text I always think is something you do afterwards, and I think it's so
Mm.
fascinating because that's when you can have these conversations and pick it apart. But I don't know, I go on autopilot and just weird stuff comes out and it's
You know,
just
I respect that. I am a firm proponent that of the story coming first.
Mm.
If it's an either or, if it's story or marketing. I mean, hopefully there's this like lovely
Yeah.
marriage of the two and it works out nicely. But if there's ever any sort of divergence, then I'm all about story coming first, even if there isn't a clear section in the bookstore for it or whatever that might be. So I understand where you're coming from. And I feel like a lot of people who don't write uh, don't fully understand what you said. Like the George of 7 or 8 years ago was going through some stuff and was working through some things and, really had some interesting stuff kind of come to mind. Because
Mm.
as writers, I think not only through horror and darker genres like that, but really any type of book, often in retrospect, we can see working through some of our own issues,
Yeah.
not in the most obvious ways that people would suspect, like, oh, you're this character, but just in the way that we think about different themes or the
Yeah.
stuff that does come up.
I
So
mean,
it's
it's the
interesting.
stuff at the time that's on your mind and that's
Mm.
interesting you. Do you know? I
Right.
mean, there'll be certain subjects that are just at the time of writing the book that you're just fascinated by, and that gets laced into that book. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, one thing I'll say this book does bring up the theme of is toxic relationships and
Mm.
like differing forms of toxic relationships. Um, and where the line is with, do you keep going with that specific relationship or do you have to let it go?
Mm.
Um, and like at the time, I'm like, oh yeah, I was thinking about that, wasn't I? Oh yeah, yeah.
It was
8 year
perhaps
ago.
on my mind at the moment.
Yeah. Maybe there was something there. Who needs a therapist when you can write a book, you know?
It can be awfully helpful.
Yeah. Very cathartic.
So let's get a bit more into the writing bit. So at the beginning of the story, you set the stage. I love looking at beginnings of stories and how people lay the groundwork for tone and I'm just like I love that kind of thing. And you had some descriptions in there that absolutely made my skin crawl before you even got to the quote unquote like true horror elements of the story. So if you have a weak stomach, you can just like skip ahead 5 seconds. But for example, hair, teeth, and nails carpeted the floor, crunching like snow beneath his boots. Disgusting. Amazing. I mean, that would be, I was a teacher for a long time. That would have gotten like, you know, horrible. I love it, in the corner. Do you keep a notebook of creepy imagery like this? Just those sensory descriptions, or does it just come to you in the moment? Do you do any prep for these kinds of descriptions?
Yes, yes, I do.
You
You know,
do.
I do. Um, something that this is a bit of a tangent, but I swear it'll come back to it. But I write all of my books. This is so strange. I write all of the first drafts of my books on email and send it to
That is
myself.
a
That's my
first.
plan.
I have never heard of that, but we're all weird, so please go on.
Yeah. No, but there is reasoning behind this madness. I promise. Stay with me. Stay with me. Don't click off the video. Um, it's because I'm always scared that my laptop's gonna break and I'll lose. People say that you can get backup files. I'm not smart enough. I'm not smart enough to know how to do that. Just let me click an email, send it to myself. George feels happy doing that. I feel like I can sleep well knowing that it's on an email. But I do that I weirdly enough, I think when you're on a train, imagery comes to you and like ideas come to you because you're just sitting there looking out a window and you're going, oh yes, look, there's Greenland, there's cows, and then oh yes, see there's teeth, beneath beneath crunching boots and stuff. And random things will come to me, this imagery, and I'll write it down on my phone. And I won't send it to myself, but I'll screenshot it and then favorite it. So I can't lose it in my endless, reels of pictures and photos and whatnot. And then I'll use it in a specific file when I go back to it writing a book, and I'll be like, that was good. I'm going to use that. So yeah, just sometimes, I think something that's very understated is the fact that when you're a writer, you get so much stuff from just going out and living. Even if you're just sat in a restaurant or something and you're just watching someone with a butter knife, you're like, yes, yes, there's something, they're doing something weird with that butter knife. I'm going to write this down. And I think sometimes there is a bit of a cliche where people think, oh, you're not going to write a character about me, are you? And it's like, no, I'm more interested in the butter knife person over there. Like, what are they doing? What are they doing? Um, but yeah, I do collect things from everyday life and things that spring to me. And then I come back to them at the end of writing that first draft, and then I sprinkle them in where I feel it's necessary. Because I think sometimes as well, especially if you've got a deadline, I don't know, like if you know this as well, but like you can it can feel a bit half baked in the descriptions because you're like must give a draft, must give a draft. So then those little sprinkling like adages of descriptions can really bolster something. And yeah.
I like that. You go back and kind of give it seasoning. Like I've heard of similar things being like adding butter to something, just those little like juicy things
Mm.
that maybe just appeal to you, but add all of this flavor to the story. So I like that. I wasn't sure if you had, planned out any of this, but it sounds like you do have that file. Is it mostly phrases or sentences or scene ideas, or is it all of the above?
It's just sentences that will like come to me, or if just something in my head that like rings really true, and I go, oh. It's usually when I've been having gin, like to be honest with you, like oh
That's right.
yeah,
You are a gin drinker.
yes.
It helps the occasional G&T, just
Lubricates the mind.
right. So, going back to The Haunting of Morsley Manor, again, particularly, that is your third book. You've written other dark books before. This is your third, which means that you've been doing this for a little while. You've had some practice with this. What is one of the most helpful things that you've learned about writing horror as you've progressed? This can be big thing, small thing, craft, just what is one of those things that's really helped as you learned it along the way?
Um, I think specifically with horror, there always has to be. It sounds like I'm contradicting myself a little bit here, but with when you come back to it and you look at that, like the thematic tone of something and what is laced throughout it. I mean, you can have all these big, like, spectacle things of, ghosts, clowns, witches, all of these crazy things, but there always has to be something true to the story, I think, that really hits to the core of the reader. I mean, for an example, those toxic relationships. I mean, that is fundamentally what the story's about.
Hmm.
Um, Again, I wasn't aware when I was writing that it happens. But you always have to have that heart to it, I think, because you can
Hmm.
put in as many, crazy and like amazing monsters and like ghouls and stuff in a story. But I think unless you have something that really does ring true and really does resonate with the reader, then it winds up just being noise, I think.
Hmm.
The other piece of advice I would always give to like horror writers is those first three chapters need to be horrific. They need to like really pack a punch and just like really get publishers and agents' attentions. Even if it's weird, like it's horror. Be weird, be wild, be wacky. Um, there's no judgment. Because we can call it art. So we can get away with that. But yeah, I think always pack a punch in those first three chapters because also you want to get the reader's attention. But then also, yeah, just make sure when you're going back and editing that there is something, very true that stings to your story.
That is some excellent advice. For a long time, I could recognize theme in like classic literature that I was teaching and stuff, but I didn't fully understand what that meant for all of my stories. And that's basically what you're talking about, that thing at the heart of the story that really resonates on a human universal level and that people can connect with, that's woven throughout, and it doesn't need to be super serious, but just you know
Yeah.
grounds
What's
the
it really
whole thing.
about? Yeah.
Right, what is it really about if you get kind of beneath the skin of the story. So that's awesome that you have reached that point. You know, two or three books in to find that. So kind of a follow up to what you said was some of your advice for horror writers. How do people make the first three chapters horrific? You said be weird. You said a couple of things, but is there any other more specific advice you would give to somebody who wants to follow what you're saying but just isn't quite sure how to pull it off?
So with that first chapter, throw throw the reader in cold. Just I would say just throw them in cold to a really, it is a cold open. Why did I say it like that? That's so clunky. It's just a cold open. So I would say with horror, throw us into a situation where we can see whatever the like monster is or the threat of the story is, and just how like animalistic and horrific they are. And keep that. I always do a prologue, but keep that like short and snappy, just like a page or two, and just try and really make it jump out and be like to whoever's reading it. Um, and then try and do something a little bit more tamed with that first chapter, which sets up the protagonist, and shows their capabilities and just how competent they are at what they're doing, and just shows off who they are, like establish. I mean, that first chapter is always about establishing that protagonist, but also just the story and the world building and the rules of it. So you have to do that. You have to establish all of that in your like mini prologue and then your first chapter. And then the next two chapters, I think you can kind of do whatever you want with. I think as long as you've got that prologue and then the first chapter, when you're submitting and obviously people are reading it, if people are hooked by those first two things, it's good. It's all gravy, baby.
I love it. Well, for people who want to check out your upcoming book or your previous two, where can people connect with you and your work online?
So my books are available. I believe Face of Evil you can get on Amazon and Waterstones here in the UK. Um, I believe all of my other books are available on Amazon. I think it's Barnes and Noble, Waterstones, Simon and Schuster and stuff. And then on social media, I am on Instagram. I am just George Morris Deaf because I can't do the yeah. It's great. I love it
Get
when people yeah, yeah.
it?
Um, and then on Twitter, I am at King of Swank. It's a stupid name. I'm aware. It's a very stupid name. But George Morris Deaf was taken over there. So
Was it really?
what can I do, you know?
You had no choice.
It's art. It's art, you know. Just justify anything. It's art.
Well, I will put all of those links down below so you can connect with George and his upcoming work, The Haunting of Morsley Manor, which hopefully has tickled your interest. You know, if you're a horror reader, I feel like this is a must pick up. What day does it come out?
'30th.
September 30th. Okay, so by the time this video goes live, September 30th, 2025 is a month and a half out, but I'm sure you can pre-order before then. So thank you so much once again for joining me. This was a really fun interview, and the book is, an experience that that I think readers will really enjoy out there. So yeah, thank you for joining me and thank you for watching. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, like this if you like it, and check out the rest of the videos for more interviews like this. Until next week, bye.